The dusty town of Red Rock had never seen anything like her. Standing nearly 7 feet tall with muscles that could put a blacksmith to shame, Ayanna Thunderbear walked down Main Street like she owned every inch of it. Her long black hair flowed behind her like a war banner, and her dark eyes held a challenge that made grown men look away. She had arrived 3 days ago, claiming to be the strongest woman in all the territories. Word spread quickly through the saloons and trading posts about this Apache giant who could lift a full-grown horse, break iron chains with her bare hands, and wrestle bulls to the ground for sport. The local men whispered nervously among themselves, both fascinated and terrified by this force of nature. "Men are too weak for me," Ayanna would declare loudly whenever someone dared to approach her. She would flex her massive arms, making the leather bands around her wrists creak under the strain. "I have defeated warriors from 7 tribes, cowboys from 3 states, and even a famous strongman from back east. Not one man alive can match my strength." The townspeople gathered to watch her demonstrations each morning in the town square. She would lift wagon wheels above her head, bend horseshoes into perfect circles, and challenge any man brave enough to arm wrestle her. Those foolish enough to try found themselves flat on their backs within seconds, nursing bruised egos and sore arms. Sheriff Coleman, a burly man himself, had tried to match her strength on her second day in town. The contest lasted less than 10 seconds before he was sent sprawling into the dust, his pride as battered as his backside. Even Big Jim Murphy, the town's unofficial strongman who worked at the lumber mill, couldn't budge her arm an inch when he challenged her to an arm wrestling match. "Where I come from, women do the work of 10 men, Ayanna would boast, tossing her hair proudly. "Apache women are born strong, but I was blessed by the spirits with the power of thunder and lightning. My grandmother could carry a buffalo on her shoulders, and my mother could split rocks with her fist, but even they would be impressed by my strength." The men of Red Rock began to avoid her, crossing to the other side of the street when they saw her coming. Some left town entirely, claiming they had urgent business elsewhere. The women watched with a mixture of admiration and concern as this powerful stranger disrupted their peaceful community. Local rancher Pete Harrison had tried to hire her for heavy work, offering good wages for someone who could do the job of several men. But Ayanna just laughed at him. "I don't work for weak men," she had said, lifting his prize bull clear off the ground to prove her point. "If you want my help, you must first prove you deserve it. Beat me in a contest of strength, and I will consider your offer." The saloon keeper, old Tom, had even offered her free meals and lodging if she would tone down her challenges and stop scaring away his customers. But Ayanna refused, saying she would only accept hospitality from someone who could earn her respect through strength, not words. As the days passed, the giant Apache woman's reputation grew beyond Red Rock. Travelers carried tales of her incredible strength to neighboring towns, and some even made the journey just to witness her displays of power. She welcomed the attention, setting up increasingly impressive demonstrations that left audiences speechless. One afternoon, she lifted the entire front end of a loaded supply wagon while the wheel was being repaired, holding it steady for 20 minutes without breaking a sweat. Another time, she arm wrestled 5 men simultaneously, defeating them all while barely exerting herself. The local blacksmith challenged her to bend his strongest iron rod, and she not only bent it but twisted it into the shape of a flower. "This is what real strength looks like," she would announce after each victory. "Men think they are powerful because they can swing hammers and lift sacks of grain. But true power comes from the spirit, from the blood of warriors, from the blessing of the earth itself. Until a man can match the fury of a thunderstorm or the endurance of a mountain, he is nothing but a child playing at being strong." Her words stung the pride of every man in town, but none could dispute them. She had proven herself superior in every test of strength they could devise. Some began to wonder if such a man existed anywhere in the world, one who could humble this towering Apache woman and restore their wounded masculine pride. The sound of spurs jangling on wooden planks announced his arrival before anyone saw him. Jack Morgan stepped off the afternoon stagecoach with the easy confidence of a man who had seen every corner of the frontier. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5 feet 10 inches, but there was something solid about him that made people take notice. His weathered hands suggested years of hard work, and his calm blue eyes held the steady gaze of someone who didn't rattle easily. Unlike the other men in town who had either fled or cowered, Jack seemed completely unbothered by the stories he heard about Ayanna Thunderbear within minutes of his arrival. The stagecoach driver, nervous and sweating, had filled him in on the town's unusual situation during the ride from Silver Creek. "Mister, you'd best keep your head down and your mouth shut around that Apache giantess," the driver had warned. "She sent more men packing than a rattlesnake convention. Strongest thing on two legs I ever did see." But Jack just nodded politely and tipped his hat. "Much obliged for the warning," he had said simply. Now, as he walked down Main Street carrying his worn leather saddlebags, the townspeople watched with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Here was another lamb walking straight into the lion's den. Some women peered from behind curtains, already feeling sorry for this stranger who didn't know what he was walking into. Jack checked into the hotel, cleaned up from his journey, and then did exactly what the locals expected but dreaded. He walked straight to the town square where Ayanna was holding her daily demonstration of strength. A crowd had gathered to watch her lift a full water barrel above her head with one hand, while balancing on one foot. "Impressive," Jack said loudly enough for everyone to hear. His voice was calm and respectful, but it carried across the square. Ayanna set down the barrel and turned to face this newcomer. She looked him up and down, taking in his modest height, his simple clothes, and his relaxed posture. A slow smile spread across her face, the kind a cat might wear when spotting a particularly plump mouse. "Another brave fool has come to test himself against me," she announced to the crowd. "Tell me, little cowboy, what makes you think you can succeed where all others have failed?" The townspeople held their breath. They had seen this scene play out before, always with the same humiliating result for whichever man had been foolish enough to challenge their resident Amazon. Jack stepped forward, removing his hat respectfully. "Name's Jack Morgan, ma'am. I'm not here to challenge you. I just wanted to meet the woman everyone's been talking about from here to Santa Fe." This unexpected response caught Ayanna off guard. Men usually either ran away or immediately demanded a contest. They didn't introduce themselves politely or call her ma'am with genuine respect in their voice. "You're not here to prove your strength against mine?" she asked, suspicious now. "Well," Jack said thoughtfully, "I reckon strength comes in different forms. What you're doing here is mighty impressive, no doubt about it. But I've always found that the strongest folks don't usually need to prove it to everyone they meet." A murmur ran through the crowd. No one had ever spoken to Ayanna Thunderbear like this before, certainly not with such calm confidence. Ayanna's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you saying I'm weak, cowboy?" "No, ma'am," Jack replied evenly. "I'm saying you're obviously very strong. I'm just curious why it matters so much to you that everyone else knows it." The giant Apache woman took a step closer, looming over Jack like a thundercloud. "I have defeated every man who has dared to challenge me. Warriors, strongmen, champions, all of them lie broken in my wake. What makes you think your words carry any weight?" Jack looked up at her calmly, showing no sign of intimidation despite the 1.5-foot height difference between them. "Maybe because I'm not here to fight you, ma'am. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is walk away from a fight they don't need to have." This philosophical approach was entirely new to Ayanna. She had built her reputation on physical dominance, on proving her superiority through contests of raw strength. But here was a man who seemed completely unimpressed by her size and power, not because he was foolish or ignorant, but because he simply didn't see the world the same way she did. "You think you're clever with your fancy words," she said, but there was less venom in her voice now and more curiosity. "I think," Jack said, adjusting his hat, "that you might be the most interesting person this town has seen in a long while. And I'd be honored to buy you supper and hear some of your stories, if you'd be willing to share them with a simple traveling cowboy." The crowd was stunned into silence. In all their experience with Ayanna Thunderbear, no one had ever simply asked to hear her stories. The hotel dining room had never hosted such an unusual dinner party. Ayanna Thunderbear sat across from Jack Morgan, her massive frame making the sturdy wooden chair creak with every movement. The other diners kept stealing glances at their table, whispering behind their hands about the strange sight of the feared Apache giant, sharing a meal with the quiet cowboy who had somehow avoided being thrown through the nearest window. Jack had kept his word, ordering the best meal the kitchen could provide and listening with genuine interest as Ayanna told stories of her youth among her people. She spoke of learning to hunt before she could properly walk, of wrestling with young bears as other children played with dolls, and of the day she realized her strength far exceeded that of any warrior in her tribe. "The medicine man said I was touched by the thunder spirits," she explained. cutting through a thick steak with surprising delicacy despite her powerful hands. He told me I would never find peace until I found someone who could match my power. That must be a lonely way to live, Jack observed, sipping his coffee. Ayanna paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. No one had ever called her life lonely before. They had called it impressive, frightening, or amazing, but never lonely. Strength doesn't require company, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Maybe not, Jack agreed, but people do. As the evening wore on, something strange began to happen. Ayanna found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't for years. Jack didn't flinch when she gestured broadly and accidentally knocked over the salt shaker. He didn't seem intimidated when she laughed loudly enough to rattle the windows. Most surprisingly, he didn't spend the entire meal trying to find ways to prove he was stronger, smarter, or better than her. Instead, he told her about his own travels, about lonely nights under desert stars and the satisfaction of honest work. He spoke of cattle drives through impossible terrain, of helping settlers build their dreams in harsh country, and of the quiet pride that came from doing what needed to be done without expecting praise or recognition. You ever think about settling down somewhere? Ayanna asked, surprising herself with the question. Jack smiled. Sometimes, but I suppose I haven't found the right place yet, or maybe the right reason. After dinner, they walked slowly through the quiet streets of Red Rock. The evening air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets and distant music from the saloon. Ayanna found herself matching her usually thunderous stride to Jack's more measured pace. You really aren't afraid of me, are you? She asked suddenly. Should I be? Jack replied. You haven't given me any reason to be afraid. You're strong, sure enough, but that doesn't make you dangerous to folks who aren't looking for trouble. They paused near the town's small church, its white steeple pale in the moonlight. Ayanna sat down heavily on the front steps and Jack settled beside her, looking remarkably small next to her towering form. Everyone else sees my strength first, she said quietly. They either want to challenge it or run from it. You're the first person who seemed to see past it. Maybe that's because I know strength isn't the most important thing about a person, Jack said. I've met plenty of strong folks who were cruel and plenty of gentle folks who were tougher than leather when it counted. Ayanna turned to look at him in the dim light. What do you think is the most important thing, then? Jack was quiet for a long moment, considering. I reckon it's how you treat people who can't do anything for you. How you act when nobody's watching. Whether you use what gifts you have to help or to hurt. And what do you think about how I've been using my gifts? She asked, and there was something vulnerable in her voice that hadn't been there before. Jack met her gaze steadily. I think you've been using them to keep people at a distance. Question is, what are you really afraid of? The words hit Ayanna like a physical blow. She rose abruptly from the steps, her massive frame seeming to tower even larger in the moonlight. For a moment, Jack thought he might have pushed too far, that she was about to demonstrate why so many men had ended up in the dust. But instead, she just stood there, her hands clenched at her sides, breathing heavily. You think you know me? She said, but her voice shook slightly. I think you're tired, Jack said gently, rising to face her. Tired of being alone, tired of proving yourself, tired of carrying all that strength like it's some kind of burden instead of a gift. Tears, unexpected and unwelcome, began to form in Ayanna's dark eyes. She had not cried since she was a child, and the unfamiliar sensation shocked her. I don't know how to be anything else, she whispered. Jack stepped closer, showing no fear despite the 1.5 foot difference in their heights. Maybe you don't have to be anything else. Maybe you just have to figure out what you want to do with who you already are. The next morning brought unexpected trouble to Red Rock. A group of cattle rustlers led by a notorious outlaw named Black Pete Garrison rode into town just after sunrise with guns drawn and demands for supplies. They had been terrorizing ranches across 3 counties, and now they wanted food, ammunition, and fresh horses before moving on to their next target. Sheriff Coleman, still nursing his bruised ego from his encounter with Ayanna, tried to stand up to the gang but found himself quickly overpowered. Black Pete, a cruel man with scars across his face and murder in his eyes, pistol-whipped the sheriff and left him bleeding in the dirt. This town's under new management, Black Pete announced as his 6 men spread out to control the main street. We'll be taking whatever we need, and anyone who objects can join your sheriff in the dust. The townspeople cowered in their homes and businesses, too frightened to resist. These weren't men looking for a fair fight or a contest of strength. They were killers who would shoot anyone who crossed them without a second thought. Ayanna watched from the hotel window as the outlaws began looting the general store. Her first instinct was to charge down there and teach them a lesson about picking on innocent people. But something Jack had said the night before made her pause. Was she really thinking about helping these people? Or was she just looking for another chance to prove her strength? Jack appeared beside her at the window, his face grim as he took in the situation below. "Ugly business," he said quietly. "I could stop them," Ayanna said, her massive hands clenched into fists. "I could break every one of them in half." "You probably could," Jack agreed. "Question is, should you?" Ayanna looked at him in surprise. "They're hurting innocent people. Of course I should stop them." "With your fists?" Jack asked. "Against 6 armed men who won't hesitate to shoot women and children if cornered? Sometimes the strongest way to handle a problem isn't the most obvious way." Down on the street, Black Pete was forcing the bank manager to open the safe at gunpoint. 2 of his men were loading supplies from the general store onto stolen horses, while the others kept watch. The whole operation had the efficiency of men who had done this many times before. "So what do you suggest?" Ayanna asked, frustrated by the idea of standing idle while people suffered. Jack studied the scene below with the calculating eye of a man who had faced dangerous situations before. "Well, they've got us outnumbered and outgunned, but they don't know about your particular talents. That gives us an advantage if we're smart about using it." "Us?" Ayanna repeated, looking at him with surprise. "If you're willing to work with a partner," Jack said with a slight smile. "I've got some experience dealing with men like these, though I'll admit none quite this rough." For the first time since she could remember, Ayanna felt something she had never experienced before, the desire to work alongside someone rather than prove herself against them. "What did you have in mind?" Jack outlined a plan that was both simple and clever. Rather than charging into the street like an angry bull, Ayanna would use her strength strategically while Jack used his knowledge of outlaw psychology to divide their attention and create confusion. The key is making them think they're still in control until it's too late for them to react, Jack explained. "These men are dangerous because they're organized and confident. Take away their organization, and they become just another group of scared criminals." 20 minutes later, Jack walked calmly out of the hotel and approached the outlaws as if he had no idea anything was wrong. He whistled cheerfully and nodded pleasantly to Black Pete, who was beginning to get suspicious about this stranger's complete lack of fear. "Morning, gentlemen," Jack said cordially. "Fine day for a ride, isn't it?" "Get back inside, Cowboy, before you get hurt," Black Pete growled, his hand moving to his gun. "Oh, I'm not looking for trouble," Jack said, raising his hands peacefully. "Just wondering if you fellows might be interested in some information about the bank vault. See, I happen to notice they've got a second safe hidden behind the main one. Lots more money than what you're probably finding in the first one." This was exactly the kind of tip that Black Pete couldn't ignore, even though something about this helpful stranger bothered him. Greed won out over caution, and he ordered 2 of his men to take Jack inside the bank to investigate while the others continued loading supplies. That was exactly what Jack had been hoping for. With the gang's attention divided and 3 of them now inside the bank, it was time for Ayanna to make her move. What happened next became the stuff of legend in Red Rock for years to come. The remaining outlaws on the street suddenly found their horses rearing and bolting, as a massive shadow seemed to move between the buildings faster than seemed humanly possible. The first outlaw didn't even see Ayanna coming. One moment he was guarding the stolen horses. The next moment he found himself lifted clean off his feet and thrown into the horse trough with a tremendous splash. Before he could even sputter to the surface, his gun belt was gone, tossed onto a nearby rooftop far out of reach. His partner spun around at the sound of the splash, just in time to see a 7-foot Apache woman bearing down on him like an avalanche. He managed to draw his gun, but Ayanna was already too close. She grabbed his wrist and squeezed gently, just enough to make him drop the weapon with a yelp of pain. Then she picked him up by his belt and collar and deposited him in the same horse trough as his friend. "Stay there if you want to stay. Breathing," she advised in a voice like distant thunder. The third outlaw on the street had better reflexes. He got his gun out and even managed to fire a shot, but Ayanna had already anticipated this. She grabbed a nearby wooden barrel and hurled it with such force that it knocked the gun from his hands and sent him tumbling backward into a pile of feed sacks. Inside the bank, Jack heard the gunshot and knew it was time for the second part of their plan. "Sounds like your boys are having some trouble out there," he mentioned casually to Black Pete and his two remaining men. Black Pete's eyes narrowed as he heard sounds of commotion from the street, but couldn't quite make out what was happening through the bank's small windows. "Charlie, go see what's going on," he ordered one of his men. Charlie stepped outside and immediately found himself face to face with Ayanna Thunderbear, who was now standing in the middle of Main Street like an avenging spirit. The three outlaws she had already dealt with were sitting in the horse trough, looking thoroughly defeated and dripping wet. "Well, well," Ayanna said, cracking her knuckles loudly. "Are you going to make this easy or hard?" Charlie chose hard. He went for his gun, which turned out to be a serious mistake. Ayanna moved with surprising speed for someone her size, closing the distance between them before he could clear leather. She grabbed his gun hand and lifted him completely off the ground, holding him dangling in the air like a scolded child. "I said easy or hard," she reminded him. "You chose hard." She carried the struggling outlaw over to the town's water pump and held him under the flow while working the handle with her free hand. After a thorough soaking, she deposited him with his soggy companions. Black Pete, watching through the bank window, finally realized what he was dealing with. This wasn't just some unusually large woman. This was something beyond his experience, beyond his ability to handle with normal outlaw tactics. "We're leaving," he announced to his remaining companion and Jack. "Right now." "I wouldn't recommend the front door," Jack said helpfully. "Your boys out there seem to have encountered some local hospitality they weren't expecting." Black Pete's face twisted with rage and desperation. He was a man who had built his reputation on fear and violence, and he couldn't let some oversized squaw destroy that reputation. He decided to use the oldest outlaw trick in the book: take a hostage. "You tell that giant witch out there to back off, or the bank manager gets a bullet," he snarled, pressing his gun to the terrified man's head. Jack's expression didn't change, but his voice got noticeably colder. "That would be a mistake," he said quietly. "Would it now?" Black Pete sneered. "Seems to me I'm the one holding all the cards." "You're holding a gun to an innocent man's head," Jack replied. "And that lady out there, she takes a very dim view of folks who hurt innocent people. Up until now, she's been playing gentle with your boys. But if you hurt that banker, well, let's just say you won't enjoy finding out what she's like when she stops being gentle." As if summoned by his words, Ayanna appeared in the bank doorway. She had to duck considerably to fit through the frame, and her presence seemed to fill the entire room. Her dark eyes took in the situation instantly, Jack standing calmly to one side, the remaining outlaw pointing a shaking gun at his partner, and Black Pete holding the banker hostage. "Let him go," she said simply. "Stay back or he dies." Black Pete shouted, but there was panic in his voice now. All his experience with intimidation and violence had prepared him for many things, but not for dealing with a woman who could literally tear him apart with her bare hands. Ayanna stepped fully into the bank, and suddenly the spacious room felt very small indeed. "I'm going to count to 3, she said in a voice that sounded like approaching thunder. 1, I mean it. I'll shoot him. 2, Black Pete's gun hand was shaking now. He had faced down sheriffs, soldiers, and rival outlaws, but he had never encountered anything like the calm, implacable presence of this Apache giant who seemed completely unimpressed by his threats. 2.5, Ayanna continued, taking another step forward. Black Pete's nerve finally broke completely. Instead of waiting for Ayanna to reach 3, he shoved the banker aside and fired directly at her chest. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the bank, and for a terrifying moment everyone expected to see the giant Apache woman fall. But Ayanna had been expecting this. The moment she saw his finger tighten on the trigger, she threw herself sideways with surprising grace. The bullet whistling harmlessly past her shoulder to embed itself in the wooden wall behind her. Before Black Pete could fire again, she was already moving. What happened next was over almost too quickly to follow. Ayanna lunged forward, her massive hand closing around Black Pete's gun arm. There was a brief, sharp sound of metal bending, and suddenly the outlaw found himself holding a pistol that had been twisted into a useless pretzel of steel and wood. "How did you?" he stammered, staring at the ruined weapon in disbelief. "Practice," Ayanna said simply, then picked him up by his vest and held him at eye level despite his thrashing attempts to break free. "Now you have a choice. You can apologize to these good people for the trouble you've caused, or I can introduce you to the horse trough like your friends outside." The remaining outlaw, seeing his leader dangling helplessly in Ayanna's grip, decided discretion was the better part of valor. He dropped his gun and raised his hands high above his head. "I surrender." "Don't hurt me, lady." Jack calmly collected the dropped weapon and checked on the banker, who was shaken but unharmed. "You did good," he told Ayanna quietly. "Real good." Outside, a crowd was beginning to gather as word spread that the feared outlaw gang had been defeated single-handedly by the Apache woman they had all been afraid of just days before. Sheriff Coleman, despite his injuries, had managed to drag himself out of his office and was looking at the scene with amazement. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled," he muttered, taking in the sight of 4 outlaws sitting soaked and defeated in the horse trough while their leader dangled from Ayanna's grip like a disobedient child. Ayanna carried Black Pete outside and deposited him with his soggy companions. "You boys are going to sit there real quiet-like while the sheriff figures out what to do with you," she informed them. "And if any of you even think about causing more trouble, remember that I'll be watching." The outlaws, thoroughly beaten and demoralized, nodded rapidly in agreement. Their fearsome reputation seemed like a distant memory, now that they had encountered someone who made them look like children playing at being tough. As the townspeople emerged from their hiding places, something unexpected began to happen. Instead of the fearful whispers and nervous glances Ayanna had grown accustomed to, she found herself surrounded by grateful faces and words of sincere thanks. "Ma'am, I can't thank you enough," said Mrs. Henderson from the general store. "Those men would have taken everything we had. You saved our whole town," added young Tommy Fletcher, looking up at her with hero worship in his eyes rather than fear. Old Tom from the saloon pushed through the crowd carrying a bottle of his finest whiskey. "This is for you, Miss Thunderbear," he said formally, with the gratitude of everyone in Red Rock. For the first time in her adult life, Ayanna found herself using her strength not to prove her superiority over others, but to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The feeling was entirely different from the hollow satisfaction she had gotten from winning contests and challenges. This felt like something real, something that mattered. Jack appeared at her elbow, grinning broadly. "Seems like you've made quite an impression," he observed. "It feels different," Ayanna said quietly, accepting the congratulations of townspeople who no longer saw her as a threat, but as their protector. "Using my strength this way, I mean. It feels right." "That's because you're finally using it for the right reasons," Jack replied. "Not to prove you're better than other folks, but to help folks who need helping." Sheriff Coleman limped over, his hat in his hands despite the bandage around his head. "Miss Thunderbear," he said formally, "I'd like to apologize for the way I acted when you first came to town, and I'd like to ask if you might consider staying on as a deputy. This town could use someone with your particular talents." Ayanna looked down at the sheriff in surprise. A week ago he had been just another man trying to prove he was stronger than her. Now he was offering her a position of respect and responsibility in the community. "I'll think about it," she said, which was more than she had ever offered anyone before. As the crowd began to disperse and the outlaws were led away to jail, Ayanna found herself walking once again with Jack through the quiet streets of Red Rock. But this time everything felt different. The townspeople who passed them on the street nodded respectfully and called out friendly greetings instead of crossing to the other side in fear. 6 months later, Red Rock had transformed into one of the most peaceful towns in the territory. Deputy Ayanna Thunderbear's reputation had spread far and wide, but now it was a reputation that attracted settlers and honest businessmen rather than driving them away. Word had gotten out that Red Rock was under the protection of a woman who could handle any trouble that might arise, and trouble had largely decided to go elsewhere. Ayanna wore her deputy's badge with quiet pride. Pinned to a specially made vest that actually fit her massive frame, she no longer spent her days challenging random men to contests of strength. Instead, she helped repair buildings damaged by storms, assisted ranchers with heavy work, and generally made herself useful to the community that had finally accepted her as one of their own. But the most significant change in her life wasn't the badge or the respect of the townspeople. It was the man who had stayed by her side through it all, the quiet cowboy who had seen past her strength to the lonely woman beneath. Jack had taken a job at the local ranch, but he spent most of his free time with Ayanna, and she found herself looking forward to his company in ways that still surprised her. He was the first person who had ever made her feel that her size and strength weren't the most important things about her, and slowly she had begun to believe it herself. "You know," Jack said one evening as they sat on the church steps watching the sunset, "I've been thinking about that settling down conversation we had a while back." Ayanna felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. "Have you now? Seems to me I might have found the right place," Jack continued, his voice carefully casual. "And maybe the right reason, too." She looked down at him, this man who had somehow proven her initial boast completely wrong. He hadn't defeated her through superior strength or clever tricks. Instead, he had simply shown her that true strength came not from dominating others, but from choosing when and how to use the power you had been given. "Jack Morgan," she said slowly, "are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" "Well," Jack said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a simple gold band, "I reckon that depends on what you think I'm asking." The ring looked impossibly small in his hands, and Ayanna couldn't help but laugh at the practical problems they would face. "You know that's never going to fit on my finger, don't you?" "Already talked to the blacksmith about that," Jack replied with a grin. "He says he can size it up proper. Question is, do you want him to?" Ayanna stared at the ring, then at Jack's earnest face, then back at the ring. For a woman who had spent her entire adult life proclaiming that men were too weak for her, this moment represented everything she had never thought possible. Here was a man who wasn't trying to prove he was stronger than her, wasn't intimidated by her size, and wasn't asking her to be anything other than exactly who she was. "You really want to marry a woman who could accidentally break you in half while giving you a hug?" she asked, though there was warmth in her voice rather than challenge. "I really want to marry the woman who chose to use her strength to protect people instead of bully them," Jack replied seriously. "The woman who's brave enough to let people see past the tough exterior to the good heart underneath. The woman who makes me want to be the best man I can be, not because I'm trying to compete with her, but because she deserves nothing less." Tears formed in Ayanna's eyes for the second time in her adult life, but these were different tears than the ones she had shed months ago. These weren't tears of loneliness or confusion, but tears of joy and belonging. "Yes," she said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack slipped the ring onto her massive finger, where it hung loose despite the blacksmith's best efforts at estimation. They both laughed at the sight, and Jack produced a length of leather cord from his pocket. "Figured we might need a backup plan," he said, threading the ring onto the cord and tying it around her neck, "at least until we can get it sized proper." As news of their engagement spread through Red Rock, the townspeople reacted with unanimous approval. These were people who had witnessed firsthand how Jack and Ayanna brought out the best in each other, how their partnership had helped save their town and transform their giant protector from a source of fear into a source of pride. The wedding, held 3 weeks later in the town square, was the largest celebration Red Rock had ever seen. People came from neighboring towns just to witness the marriage of the legendary Apache giant and the quiet cowboy who had tamed her not through force, but through understanding and respect. Reverend Williams had to stand on a wooden crate to reach the proper height for the ceremony, and the specially made wedding dress required enough fabric to outfit 3 normal-sized brides. But none of that mattered to the couple standing before him. Hands joined despite the ridiculous size difference, promising to love and honor each other through whatever challenges life might bring. "Do you, Ayanna Thunderbear, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the Reverend asked. "I do," Ayanna replied, her voice carrying clearly across the packed square. "And do you, Jack Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jack said firmly, looking up at his bride with complete adoration. As they kissed to seal their union, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Old Tom fired his pistol into the air in celebration, and someone started playing a fiddle. The party that followed lasted well into the night, with dancing, singing, and more food than the town had seen since the last harvest festival. Years later, travelers passing through Red Rock would often hear the story of Deputy Ayanna Morgan and her husband Jack, the couple who proved that true strength came not from overpowering others, but from finding someone who brought out the best in you. Children would listen wide-eyed to tales of the giant Apache woman who could lift horses and bend iron, but who chose instead to use her gifts to protect and serve. And sometimes, If they were very lucky, those travelers might catch a glimpse of the legendary couple themselves, walking hand in hand down Main Street, the massive woman and the average-sized man who had somehow found perfect balance together. Ayanna never again boasted that men were too weak for her. She had finally found a man who was strong enough in all the ways that truly mattered, and she had learned that the greatest victory wasn't in defeating others, but in finding someone worth being gentle with. As for Jack, he often reflected on how his life had changed since that day he stepped off the stagecoach in Red Rock. He had come to town as a drifting cowboy with no particular destination in mind, and he had found not just a home, but a purpose and a love that exceeded anything he had ever dared to imagine. Their marriage became a testament to the idea that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful thing two people can do is choose to build something together rather than compete against each other. In a world where size and power often determined relationships, they had proven that understanding, respect, and genuine affection could bridge any gap. And if anyone in Red Rock ever doubted the depth of their love, they needed only to watch Jack gently adjusting Ayanna's deputy badge each morning, or see the way she carefully moderated her enormous strength when she hugged him, to understand that they had found something truly rare and precious in each other.